The rain poured down in sheets. Sam had just made it to the library before the downpour. He stood under the archway of the front door and watched the rain beat the pavement for a moment before he turned to open the door. The familiar smell of old books, old wood, and old carpet filled his nostrils and gave him a sense of comfort and warmth. A tiny surge of childish excitement tingled up from his toes to the top of his head at the mere thought of seeing Andrew. He noticed a metal bowl on top of the circulation desk and wondered what it was there for when he heard a droplet of water hit the bucket with a tinny splash. The ceiling was leaking. Odd. The rain had just started coming down literally 1 minute ago. Sam shrugged it off and continued past the circulation desk. He made his way to the back of the library where he always sat vigil. Someone was sitting in his spot. Fuck, now what? He thought. Sam scanned the room and realized there were empty spots everywhere, and this dumb bitch had to sit her ass down in his spot. Fuck, Sam thought, and began to walk to the table next to the one he usually sat at. He removed his backpack and placed it on the table. Now to go collect some books. This time he actually had a purpose. He had a paper that was due by the end of the week, and he actually had to look up a few things from physical sources and not the World Wide Web. Sam walked over to the tall shelves to the right of the tables and entered between two of them like he was walking between two columns. He heard thunder crack from outside. He stopped for a moment when the lights flickered. He waited to see if they would go out. They didn't. Sam continued to the end of the row of books and stopped at the wall on the other side of the rows of shelves. There was a nice selection of books on the entertainment industry. He searched for a few titles on filmmakers of the mid to late 20th century. The topic of his paper concerned politics and how they were reflected in filmmaking at that point in history. Sam was already wishing he'd finished the paper 2 weeks ago when it was assigned. He spent more time looking at Andrew and not enough time looking for sources. He regretted nothing. Sam pulled some books from the shelf on the wall and turned back to the rows of shelves. He walked the book-lined passage back to where his table awaited him. Sam emerged from the rows of books and saw that his original spot was empty. He felt a surge of joy shoot through his body as he unloaded his selection of books onto the table that was his rightful spot. He retrieved his belongings from the other table and settled in. When he sat down, an unusually loud boom of thunder rolled and shook the building. The lights immediately went out, leaving the library in complete darkness. Sam sat still, holding his breath. After what seemed like a full minute, he exhaled slowly and allowed himself to breathe again. His eyes adjusted quickly. The drops of water hitting the metal bowl on the circulation desk suddenly seemed louder than before. The sound seemed magnified. Sam was scared to move. He wished the lights would just come back on. Where was Andrew? Where the hell was Mrs. Drake? Sam was completely alone in this big empty room except the books that kept him company. Panic began building up inside him as he recalled his nightmare. This is not happening, he kept telling himself. Come on, let the lights come back on. Fuck, Sam muttered under his breath. His voice seemed to echo throughout the room, even at a whisper. Sam began to feel extremely uneasy. Something isn't right. Nobody is coming out from the back. What the hell is going on? Sam realized that even by the circulation desk, it was just as dark as it was inside the main room. There were windows in that area. It shouldn't be this dark throughout the entire building. It was 3 in the fucking afternoon. The storm clouds couldn't possibly be dark enough to make it appear like it was midnight. There was barely any light at all illuminating the interior of the library. It was as if whatever light there was had been evenly distributed throughout the entire place, and that wasn't really saying much. Tears welled up behind Sam's eyes. This is ridiculous, he thought. This is utterly fucking stupid. Get up, Sam. Get up and just walk over to the desk. If you call out and nobody answers, all you have to do is turn around and walk the fuck out. Just get up, Sam. He kept telling himself to get up, yet his body would not obey his command. He couldn't move. He was petrified and didn't really understand why. Sam wished Andrew would just walk out with a cart of books so he would feel safe again. "Andrew, where are you? Please come out. Please." Sam heard something move from the top of one of the tall shelves. He stared as hard as he could through the darkness. It sounded like something was adjusting itself on the shelf 2 rows away from his table. He held his breath and strained to hear. Nothing. Then a sudden bump sent Sam bolting from his seat and running toward the circulation desk. He looked behind him, expecting to find some monster or psychotic madman in hot pursuit, only to be met with darkness. He stood in front of the desk feeling paralyzed. The sound of the dripping water returned to his attention. He hadn't even noticed it for the last few minutes. It sounded different this time. He wondered why it wouldn't be overflowing by now. He stepped closer to the metal bowl and watched as a drop plunked into the thick red liquid inside the bowl. Jesus fucking Christ, what in the fuck is happening? It looked like blood. Blood dripping from above and landing in this fucking metal bowl. The bowl was filled right to the rim, but it never flowed over the side. The thick red drops just kept plopping in and nothing ran over. This was like a fucking nightmare. That's it, Sam realized. I'm having that fucking nightmare again, he thought. I just have to wait it through until I wake up. He was not looking forward to whatever was going to prompt his lucid state. A dark shape whisked past Sam from behind him. Sam could feel the rush of air as it whipped right around him. He jumped as a small yelp escaped his throat. Please, Andrew. Please come out so we can leave together. Sam turned toward the front door. The door seemed like it was 100 yards away. The door was actually only a few feet from the circulation desk. Nightmares fuck everything up, Sam thought. Why the hell can't I dream about falling off a fucking building like normal people? Sam heard a dry, cracked throat open up and try to form words from what sounded like nothing but air and bone. He felt the hair on his neck rise. Sam turned around wildly but couldn't locate the direction the sound was coming from. The sound was like air being let out of an old tire. Mrs. Drake! Sam shouted at the top of his lungs. Andrew! Silence. It was like Sam was suddenly underwater. He could hear nothing. His head darted back and forth between the main room and the back room behind the circulation desk. He yelled for Andrew and Mrs. Drake over and over, but couldn't hear his own voice in his head. He turned in the direction of the front door. A large, wiry hand wrapped around his entire face, fingers wrapping over the top of his head. God, no, he thought. It felt dry and dead. The fingers pulled him forward, and he was staring directly into 2 yellow eyes. Sam opened his mouth to scream, and the wiry fingers plunged into his mouth, sliding around his tongue and slithering down his throat like dry snakes. He could feel them invading his body without causing him to choke. He could feel something breathing down his neck, down the side of his face, and from the side of his left arm. There were others. He was suddenly aware of many hands wrapped around him from all directions. His jaw was popped out of its socket, but he couldn't feel any pain. His eyes were shut tight. Then the pain came. Sam felt his body being ripped apart piece by piece as a tear ran down one of his torn cheeks.